Welcome to the Introduction to Transfer Pricing. Today's topic is adjustments. This video and adjustments will now discuss how we calculate adjustments, and they're explained in one of the appendices of our standard template reports. And essentially it is how this adjustment is calculated within the software tools that we use in our work. So we're going to continue to look at making adjustments to improve the comparability of our comparable firms to our tested party. And you may notice on the screen in front of you some language from a portion of a standard template report that describes what the adjustment is for the adjustment for accounts payable. And this formula in front of you is the formula that essentially is used in some of our standard software that does this calculation internally, but you should understand where it comes from and how it works. And essentially, again, if you look at this, we're saying the amount of the adjustment is we start off by taking the accounts payable and the AAP, meaning the average accounts payable. We take the beginning of the year and the end of the year number and we average them together. But the accounts payable relative to sales of a comparable, and from that we subtract off the same ratio but for the tested party. So of course if they had the same ratios, that would come out to 0 and this would just be, there'd be no adjustment. But suppose that they're different. Then we take that amount of difference in the ratios and we multiply that by the sales level of the comparable, because that will now tell us how much additional or less accounts payable there would be if we stated the comparable with the same amount of accounts payable relative to sales as the tested party had. Then we multiply all of that by the discount factor, which is essentially the interest rate I over 1 plus I, because again this benefit happens in the future, so we wanted to create a net present value of that calculation. So this is a relatively straightforward formula. You can work through it, and I recommend that you do for some of your comparables at least a few times to get a feel for how this works. So let's take a look at how it works. So we're going to go from this to an Excel file, and we've used this example before. Let me just resize my screen here. Bring this to here. So I think you can all see that well now. And what we have here are again the same firms that we've been using in our examples. These are the same simple example that's in the Transfer Pricing Fundamentals series. And we've got their operating margins as stated before any adjustments. Now, we're keeping all the exact same things as we've seen in other examples. So you can see the accounts payable for each of the tested party and then each of the comparables, and what their ratio would be of the accounts payable relative to sales for the comparables. Right, that was the first term in that formula in the appendix to the standard report. The second term is that ratio for the tested party, which is of course going to be the same for all 4 of the comparables, because it's just one tested party, UKCO. And we look at the difference of those two, right, so that we find out what that is. And then we take that difference and we multiply that difference times the sales level of the comparables, so we can see how we would be adjusting that. Then once that is done, we take that amount and we take the discount value of it. We want it on a net present value basis. So we're measuring the time value of money of having the trade credit, but then discounting that back to the future so that we understand that we get a right comparison. And that comes up with an adjustment amount. And this is an adjustment amount that we're going to apply to the operating profit before we calculate the operating margins. So then we have an adjusted operating profit level, and these are the same as in the earlier calculations we were working through. We're just doing this in the formula or the format of what is presented in the appendix that describes our technique for this within our software tool, to our new adjusted operating margin. And these numbers probably look familiar to you from an earlier video. So you essentially can see how the process works within our transfer pricing tool. So hopefully that lays out how this is happening in background if you're using some of our software tools. And I hope you enjoyed this video and many of the other videos we have in this series. Thank you.